Hello, everybody. As you are entering into the space, I'm going to see if everybody's coming in. Here they all come. Wonderful. All right. So I want to take a few minutes on the front end to welcome you to today's session on how to build an L&D team that supports xAPI. My name's Mark Britz. I am the Director of Event Programming at the Learning Guild. You will see myself and Karen Gleason, who's hosted these sessions before. Oftentimes in Slack, welcoming you to the cohort and the community. And we are always available to answer any questions and do our best to connect you to the people and information you need as you continue your growth in xAPI. So I want to take a few minutes on the front end of our gathering today, just to walk you through a little bit about the cohort, what you can expect from it, and the value it can bring you by being involved during this particular session. Real quick. First and foremost, today, like today, I should say, we host weekly expert and practitioner-led sessions to present new ideas on xAPI and related solutions. We have an ongoing community, which you are a part of likely in Slack right now. You can also follow the Gnome on Twitter and obviously see a lot of xAPI updates on Guild social channels. We encourage you to find people, work it alone if you like, to build an xAPI project. That's what the point is, of course, is learning through doing. And you'll have that opportunity to meet like-minded folks and explore different approaches that you can use and solve the problems that you individually or your organizations need. And of course, working on a project will lead you up to the xAPI party, where you'd have a chance to showcase your work with your teams and obviously to the benefit of the whole group. Keep in mind, too, we have a steady drip of on-demand resources available to you that can be found in the resources and recordings in Slack as well. So you can keep an eye on what's coming in and up through that. Speaking of Slack, as I break down this window for you a little quick, a couple of the main channels that you'll find in here between, well, main is one of them. And then, of course, the social channel, a way to connect there, introduce yourselves, really critical to find those. The resource of the recording, which I just mentioned a moment ago, is a great place to find all of these sessions post-event. So in case you missed part of it or want to revisit. We actually have our channels that pertain to the various projects as they develop. So you can, and your team can collaborate in those particular spaces. And of course, we also have the various channels for topical conversations unrelated to the project. So things that might be a little bit sidebar and you're growing your knowledge and different use cases and opportunities to expand your understanding. xAPI, as you know, is a hands-on sport. Maximize your involvement in the community by putting your skills to work. Find a team or go solo, like I said early on. And creating is the best way to learn while involved in the cohort. A couple of things you'll know about being here in Air Meets. It's the place to be, not just to observe, but to connect and to collaborate. We have a lounge space that's available, so your teams can actually meet here as well in a more virtual visual space that's convenient around the various projects. We have the recordings that are available. You can view the schedule and watch any type of replays of all the sessions that we provide here in AirMeet, and you'll find those links, of course, as well in Slack. And a couple of things, just a bigger picture around the Learning Guild itself. We have Learning Solutions, our conference in Orlando coming up in April. We have even more than this, the two sessions highlighted here, but there'll be a lot more of opportunities, especially in data and measurement and peripheral areas of conversation around L&D. And take advantage of the conference. There is a savings up until March 3rd of $100. And of course, become a member. One of the best ways to stay in touch with the Guild is to, in fact, join by becoming a free member of the Guild, where you get access to information, updates about upcoming CFPs, webinars, and a lot more are available to you. And now, to make sure that Peter has enough time, and Peter, I did it, I got it in at 2:02 Eastern Time, I'm going to turn the floor over to you to talk about how to build an L&D team that supports xAPI.
All right, thank you, Mark. Just waiting for my camera to turn on, and there I am. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Good to be back on the xAPI cohort. Now that, let me just rearrange windows so that I can move this off to the side, keep half an eye on chat, and see my screen as I talk to you. So here's my screen. Maybe. That's a lot of options. All right. Can you give me in chat, or can you give me an emoji or something? Let me know you are seeing my screen. Okay. So let's dive right into this. Here's my basic roadmap for this afternoon. I want to introduce myself and Watershed briefly. I want to talk about skill domains for the L&D team, including analytics. Then I want to break that into specific skills. And then I want to start to build that back up to how do skills, get to people? How do skills build into roles? And then I want to leave a good bit of time for Q&A. I don't want to jinx myself. I always say this, and I never have time for Q&A, but I think I've got, so I'll have some good time for Q&A, because I think your questions and the insights that can come from that are really going to be one of the most valuable parts of this presentation. All right, 5 quick things about me. First thing, I do hold a degree in instructional technology, instructional design. From a while back at Wayne State, I did work as an instructional designer and developer for a couple years around the turn of the century, crazy to say. But then I became a high school teacher. So I'm a longtime teacher and coder. For most people, those two facts wouldn't collide, but in fact, I taught high school computer science, and then eventually software development for adults in boot camps. So for me, those two do tie together. And that's what led me into xAPI, that combination of coding and learning. I am now an implementation engineer at Watershed. In the next slide or two, I'll talk about Watershed a bit. What implementation engineer means is that I work with a variety of clients, often enterprise level businesses, and help them understand their ecosystem, help them get their ecosystem into xAPI data, and help them build analytics on top of that to understand what's going on. I'm a current MA student in game design. When I wrote this slide a few days ago, I put in Michigan State University because it's one of the top schools in the US for game design. And of course, that statement carries a different kind of weight. So I live an hour from campus. This is my first semester where I didn't have any classes on campus, but certainly my classmates, my teammates are dealing with a lot of trauma this week. So certainly I keep them in my thoughts. But on a happy note, we last semester finished a game called Unicycle Samurai. And that game is going to GDC, the Game Developer Conference in San Francisco next month, because we also built for it an alt control. We've got 2 unicycle controllers, so you can play your friend head to head. And so I'm very excited to be taking that out there to the Moscone Center. Now, you're thinking, those of you who can count are thinking, Peter, you said 5 things. There is a 6th card there. Also, those of you who can count are thinking, Peter, you just went through 5 cards, but that was like 7 or 8 things. But the last card is not about me. The last card is about my longtime co-presenter that those of you who are used to seeing me speak to the cohort might be expecting to hear from today. This is Preston. He turned 19 years old 2 weeks ago. And right after that, started to not feel so well. This is him at the vet a couple weeks ago. But there is good news. He's really sprung back this week. So we might yet hear from him. He's sleeping in the next room. We'll hope that he'll have something to say to us later on today. Okay, so Watershed is where I work. There is an offer from Watershed in the discuss demos and vendors, I believe is the title of it, or vendors and offers in Slack. Izzy posted it in late January. So you can grab one of our essentials accounts. And if you follow the instructions there, you can get it upgraded for the remainder of this cohort. But what Watershed is, it's a learning record store, as you've already heard about, a place to store your xAPI data, but then it's a learning analytics platform on top of it. So it's got powerful reporting tools and so forth. We are part of a bigger group, Learning Technologies Group. There may be several companies you've heard of there. And we live right alongside Rusticy, which is the software that drives a lot of xAPI in different systems. Okay, so let's get down to it. The topic is how to build an L&D team that supports xAPI. So what I want to start with is the L&D team. And I want to hear in the chat from you, who's on your L&D team now? If you're a student, if you're transitioning into L&D, feel free to answer roles or skills that you'd expect to be in an L&D team. If you're on a current team, what do you have now? Just me. Yeah, there's certainly, I did not build this presentation around that. There's certainly a lot of that in the industry, and I'll try to, shape some thoughts around that. We can return to that in questions. Got a lot of just me's. Okay, LXD, Learning Experience Designer, LBP, Jolt, can you expand LBP? I'm not recognizing it offhand. Project Manager, Senior Course Dev, 2 instructional designers, Learning Consultants, Project Managers, E-Learning Manager, Learning Business Partner, thank you. Lots of instructional designers. The term Learning Engineer is becoming a more common thing today. MXD, Amanda, can you spell out MXD for me? Again, just not recognizing offhand. Learning Strategist. I'd love to see some fuller breakdowns of a few of these roles. Media Experiences. Oh, okay. Okay. So more general than Learning Experience Designer, Media Experience Designer. Feel free to keep putting those in there. I'm seeing, basically the things I expected to see. So if we were to take all these, LMS administrator, can't forget about that, Megan. If we take all of these roles, I want to break them into domains. Okay, so oftentimes, especially a team of just one or just two, oftentimes you're wearing a lot of hats. And so these roles, as I started to think through this presentation, I broke into what are the major areas of these skills? What are the domains of these skills? And so, project management, these are your Scrum Masters, your Agile project managers. Megan, I'm sorry, I don't know offhand what a Llama manager is called. Llama Mama is probably not the right term, but they're the ones keeping things on the rails. I'm going to skip around a little bit. Development and delivery. Llama Shepherd, I like that. You might need to work that into the next one. Development and delivery. These are the people building the instruction. These are the people delivering virtual instructor-led and in-person instructor-led training. Megan mentioned LMS administrator. So I put in systems and platform management. These are the people managing the learning management system, managing your LXP, your learning experience portal, managing if you've got an instructor-led training platform, managing that as well. Instructional design, certainly. How do you make experiences that people are going to retain the information from, and other interventions, non-instructional. And then I'm circling around then to this organizational alignment, because for an L&D team to really be successful, you've got to have the people who are matching this up with business goals and tying this into the larger organization. Okay, so it's a huge area. And it's a lot for one person to do, certainly. It's a lot for a team to do. But when I say traditionally, I mean the past 20 years. I would say these are the main areas of the field of an L&D team. You could go back a little bit further. Rita Ritchie has a book, I think it's called The Definition Domains of Instructional Technology. And, you can kind of see in the 90s, how was that broken down? In the last 20 years, I think these have been the big ones. But today in the cohort, we also want to add this 6th domain, xAPI and learning analytics. And so the topic today is, how do we add this in? I just wanted to provide that context. By the way, feel free to put questions in the chat, or better yet, questions into the Q&A section there. It looks like the 3rd icon from the top for me. But Izzy's going to be managing those managing those questions and kind of, pulling them together for me. There's a certain flow and development that I think a lot of earlier questions will get automatically answered. So I'm not going to stop for questions at the end, but please put those questions in and Izzy will help keep track of them. Thank you for that, Izzy. Okay, so that's the context. This is the team we are plugging xAPI and learning analytics into. So why do you want this? Why can't you just say, hey, IT can handle this. Hey, we'll just get this from a vendor. We'll just connect up our stuff and, we're going to get great data, automatically, automagically. And there's Schultz's question, does xAPI belong to L&D or IT or BI? And it may also partially belong to those other groups, but I'm going to argue that xAPI belongs in L&D. For the reasons that the slide's laying out. So you want this domain within your team first for good, reliable data. You can't just consume this data. You have to proactively plan. You have to set good governance in place, and you have to consistently generate this data and make sure that all your systems, the parts of your ecosystem, are working together and are continuing to generate this data. Okay. Then you want this domain because you want immediate access to that meaningful and create in-depth analysis, meaningful data and create in-depth analysis. So for learning leaders really to drive change, they've got to be able to link the learning to those business outcomes I already mentioned, generate impact metrics and so forth. Your team can get insight from analytics, more effective employee learning, that learner experience, time and money savings, pruning the things that aren't paying off and so forth, and also proving out your financial impact on the business. What is L&D really doing? And perhaps most of all, having this domain within your team gives you ready access to your learning data. What we hear so often from customers, why they go to Watershed in the first place, or what they're happy to get from us is when they rely on IT, they get their data, they get it changed, they get a report generated when somebody gets to it. And often it's not when they really need that data, when it's useful to them. It's old by the time it reaches them. And so having this capability to build reports, customize reports, do that exploratory analysis within your team means you can get what you need when you need it. So what you're really looking for on your team is people who are going to work in your team, work with IT, not for IT. As Jenny is saying over there, how would IT know which data you care about? It really needs to be L&D who is driving this. There's a lot we can learn from business intelligence, BI. We need the support of IT. And often when bringing a new solution in, you're going to actively have to engage with IT. But this is really a domain that ought to exist within at least larger L&D teams. I struggled with where to put this slide. I am building on my colleague Bill Conran's learning analytics team presentation for this. I really wanted to get this in. I went back and forth where to put it. I'm putting it here because we've just said you want this in L&D. And I think this helps make the argument and goes to Jenny's point about how would IT know which data you care about. These are often the things that you care about. These are the things that give value and help make the argument that this is properly within L&D driving this. I'm not going to linger. I'm not going to read this slide to you. I will make my slides available afterwards, and so you can check it out. But these are the different levels of things you want to think about looking at. Okay, so with our parent group LTG and a couple of the other companies within it, Watershed does a MIBLE report, Managing the Business Impact of Learning, MBIL, MIBLE. And this is from the last MIBLE report, looking at a variety of organizations, CLOs and other leaders, identifying what they're doing. 73% of orgs don't have a team dedicated to learning analytics. And that's true even in large organizations. The number of teams is only slightly higher there. 41% have the learning analytics team. And there's a slightly different question over here. Do you have learning analytics capability on your L&D team. And I don't have these numbers right in front of me, but you can see that it's less than half if you add up the 3 yes answers: data analyst, data engineer, and other. You can see that it's that might be 35-40% there. Okay, so where's that going? What do organizations want to do? Again, this is from the Mibble report. 60% of organizations already read that one, but 68% of organizations are not expecting that to change in the next 12 months. And only 7% of organizations said they're actively recruiting for learning analytics talent. So this is the general answers. What are your analytics plans for the next 12 months? And then this is specifically looking at respondents who answered they have no analytics on the team. And you can see the shape is not very different. The no plans yet, but we're seeing growing demand, certainly is a bigger slice of the pie for those who don't have analytics. Mibble is the Managing the Business Impact of Learning report. If you Google that, you find a downloadable copy of it. You can see the whole report. And of course, these graphs will be available to you in my slides. Okay, so we've looked at those domains. We've looked at kind of what is the whole area of an L&D team, ideally. And then we said, so we want to plug in this learning analytics domain as well, xAPI and beyond. And so I wanted to break that down into what are skills that you need to get into your group. Then we can talk about how do you build your team? How do you get those into your group? So I came up with 3 subdomains. The first is the technical. And often when people say xAPI, that's what they're thinking about. They're adding JavaScript to make something send xAPI statements, or you've got the expertise in Storyline or another authoring tool, and how is that going to, what do you have to turn on? What do you have to do to get that to send xAPI out of the box? In general, you've also got working with APIs. An API is a standard way of interfacing with a piece of software today. And you might have, within your learning ecosystem, you might have pieces, platforms that aren't xAPI, but you're going to want to get that into xAPI so that you can look at learning analytics. And one of the most common ways is going to be working with APIs. And so doing some programming to pull that data out, turn it into a format, and then send it off in xAPI statements. And as an implementation engineer, this is a lot of the work that I do. And then in general, one of the areas of data engineering, extracting and cleaning data. So being able to get a report, just straight out of one of your platforms and turning that into something which, again, can become xAPI and live together with all the rest of your learning data so you can start to pull insights out of it. So that's the technical. A lot of times, this is what projects are focusing on in the cohort. How do we actually create xAPI statements, get them into a learning record store? Then you've also got the analytic. That's more of the data science side of things. It's great to have capacity on your team, somebody who knows statistics, somebody who can do exploratory analysis of the data, start to draw insights. Historically, there's a decent emphasis on this in instructional technology, instructional design. I know when I was working on a PhD, I had to have 15 credit hours of graduate statistics to be able to make sense of learning data. So that's something we want to pull into the team, whether it's a data scientist, whether it's an instructional designer with a statistical background. And then there's also the ability to visualize the data effectively. That might not be a data scientist. That might be a graphic designer who's just really skilled, who has an interest in how do I create graphs that can really effectively convey this information and help people to break it down and understand it. So that's the analytical subdomain. And then finally, you've got the strategic. This is, again, what ties into the business portion. Identifying reporting requirements. What are the questions that L&D wants to know? What are the questions the larger business wants to know? And how are those going to show up in reports? Developing vision across the ecosystem. What are the different pieces? When do we need to bring another piece in? What are the questions which are going to help us know if we need another platform, another tool, or just another piece of content within my ecosystem? And then again, connecting learning to the business results, showing how these numbers all tie in. One thing that I've brushed against here that I wish I had broken out into a box here is just data governance. I touched on that once, like I said, but data governance is making rules and processes to ensure that your data is consistent, that when you're sending xAPI, that you are identifying things in a way that's going to lead to good reporting. I would probably put that into the strategic area as well. Okay, so we've looked at the domains. What's the team? What's this new piece? We've broken that new piece down into what are some specifics that you're going to want to get into your team in the long term. Now, how do you go about doing that? We work with a lot of different teams, and then the Mibble report also gathers information from lots of different teams. Every team is different. If you get one takeaway from today, that's probably the one. Your team is not going to have the same shape. So if you were hoping, man, Peter's going to give us a recipe, he's going to give us a set of steps, we just have to do 1, 2, 3, and we're going to have built our team, I'm going to disappoint you today. Today is not about that. Today is about suggesting some strategies, suggesting some next steps for you. So every team is different. The way that these skills distribute to different people is going to be different. How you rely on, third parties, vendors, and so forth. How you rely on other people outside your department. All those things are going to look different for your team. The most successful teams, the successful teams these days started by growing skills internally. You're probably not going to go out tomorrow and hire a data architect. So how can you do that today? Join the xAPI cohort, and then I'll have a couple next steps coming up from you. And then the other thing is be curious. So it's asking the questions, it's poking around. Those kinds of things can lead to the insights, which then prove the value of this, prove the value of xAPI, prove the value of L&D, and then allow you to further grow that team. Okay, so can you upskill? Do you have to hire? Can you upskill? Of course. That's why you're in the xAPI cohort. I just saw Megan say, try out learnxapi.com. Forgot to put that one out there. But building skills through a cohort project, whether those are technical skills, whether those are more of the strategic or analytic skills that I outlined a few slides ago. Try out learnxapi.com or take the LinkedIn Learning or Udemy course. Create a small proof of concept and then gradually grow it to a pilot. And then seek out others who want to learn. Again, xAPI cohort is going to be one of the main places where you can do that, where you can converse with people. And don't try to solve world hunger. Find one pain point, gather data. Love it, Schultz. Okay, when the time comes to hire new team members, or as you're growing your team in other ways, you don't have budget perhaps for xAPI, you don't have budget for learning analytics just yet, but you are hiring new team members. Look for people who have that curiosity, who have that passion, and at least a comfort with tech. They don't have to know xAPI, but they have to be willing to, try new things. Maybe they're a storyline developer who's never touched xAPI, but you want to look for, is this the kind of person who's, just working rote and kind of doing the same stuff? Or are they willing to poke around, check some boxes, look up a statement in a learning record store and see if it worked? Okay, so your roadmap. Like Joel just said, don't try to solve world hunger. You want a small proof of concept. Probably the first thing you're going to do is going to be technical in nature. It's kind of, can I send an xAPI statement? Can I get an xAPI statement back? Maybe can I get a graph based on it or pull it into Excel or just do something to show that I have this information? Okay. And then you're going to grow from there. I'm not going to go in depth on this because I know Megan did last week. talking about the different levels of pilot, and she's got that beautiful table showing a real good progression. Okay, but your pilot, look for one pain point, look for one need to know or nice to know, and what is the data that's going to let you answer your question? And then you can say, hey, we used xAPI, we used this learning record store, we were able to answer this question that we've never had the answer to before. I'm thinking back when I was working at Torrance Learning, working with Megan. We had a Fortune 50 company that we did a storyline for. It was sales coaching, and they had an open-ended question in storyline, and it's one of these, reflect. The real benefit is to you. Nobody is reading your answer, but this is a chance to get you to engage in the content. And one of the first interesting insight we found, as we were just looking at the first pilot of that, people doing doing the storyline, is there were a number of people who just put in a garbage answer, a jumble of letters, a couple of words, half a sentence. But what was really interesting is we saw those people go back and re-answer the question once they had taken some more of the content. It made them realize something. It made them go back and do that. It motivated them to go back and do that. So that's a fascinating thing to be able to show, that somebody answered and then re-answered. Helps you show that engagement. Okay, so look for those small points that you can question and look into. Okay, and then with that, alongside that, really these 2 points, there's a circle between. This is iterative. You're going to expand your skills. So as you're doing that pilot, it will force you to expand your skills. As you expand your skills, you're going to want to increase your pilot or add on to your pilot. Okay, and then those things are going to go together to help you prove your value proposition, that xAPI and having a learning record store and doing learning analytics is giving value to L&D, is giving it to the business as a whole. And then once you've proven out that value proposition, you can hire new roles, whether those are hybrid, partially xAPI, partially other things. That can be an easy way to ease in. Okay, we're not going to get a data analyst, but we're going to try to get this person who has a little bit more of these other skills in the domain. Now, the reality is it's not 1, 2, 3, 4. It's not a smooth, even progression. So your roadmap looks something like something out of an old family circus cartoon. It's going to be a winding road. There might be times when you backtrack or feel like you're backtracking. There will be times when you move in parallel, you feel like you're not advancing. But I think this is overall a good roadmap to kind of keep you on course and give you those steps. So we've looked at the context. We've said here is this piece that we want to plug in, this domain. We've said here are the skills. And we've said, start by growing the skills within your team, by exploring, by learning. As you prove that value, as you get opportunity for additional hires, how can those skills coalesce into specific roles? Here are a few suggestions. Okay, so the data architect is the wizard. This is the person who's coming up with the governance that I mentioned, is going to help lead the implementation. Depending on how much you're doing in-house versus how much you're depending on a consultant or a vendor, they are going to make decisions about what goes into the xAPI statement. Where does it go? Ideally, these people have modeled data before. Ideally, they've worked with xAPI before. There are more and more of us out there. They understand statement design. They understand what goes into good learning data. But you can also hire a learning architect who's not as familiar with xAPI, but understands good data in general and is ready to learn what does that look like specifically in L&D. So the data architect is a bit more of the big picture person, is a bit more of the how does learning activity translate into good data. The data analyst is the one who takes the good data and says, now what do we learn from this? What do we know? So they are going to, build the visualizations. They're going to do statistical analysis to say, is this meaningful? How much does this really tell us? They help build the reports, and they can create ad hoc reporting, whether that's exploratory, whether a new request comes in from elsewhere in the business, elsewhere within L&D, and also helps along instructional designers and program managers so that they have templates when they need to get information for themselves. So for this kind of person, you want them to have basic or advanced statistics skills. Depending on your ecosystem, depending on your tools, you might want them to know Tableau, Power BI. At the very least, they should be really good with Excel. And it's also helpful if they have worked with databases, SQL, coding in Python and R, or again, at least really good with Excel. And then the third role is the data engineer. This is the fixer, the one who builds the pipes and makes sure that the data is moving in the pipes. So they're focusing on the implementation and maintenance. It overlaps a lot with the software engineering role. They are going to be coordinating with these other two roles, but these are the ones who are primarily writing that code to get the data and move the data. And so there's this term in data engineering, extract, transform, and load, ETL. You don't necessarily need an xAPI wizard. And even at Watershed, often the data engineers we hire are not super familiar or familiar at all with xAPI, but they understand good data. They understand good ETL. And so they're going to be able to come in, and they're with a little bit of training and looking at xAPI, they're going to be able to then build things which are giving you good xAPI. And software automation, don't underestimate the importance of just having this data go daily, as opposed to somebody has to generate the report, which means your data is really 2 weeks old because they haven't gotten around to it this week. Okay, so those are the three roles. So again, my key takeaways, recapping everything we've covered today. First off, every team is different. It might not be hiring roles right now. It might be hiring somebody in an existing role who has a particular skill. It might be taking somebody in an existing skill who wants to learn and giving them the opportunity to learn about xAPI or get some additional practice with statistics, with Excel, with building visualizations. Okay, so look for the right combination for your org and how you can grow that in small ways to start. Okay, we've said this several times in the chat and myself. Stay small, prove out that value. It can be modest. Like Becky is saying 4 minutes ago, it doesn't have to be big. Her pilot project was a course for L&D professionals, and it helped them identify one confusing user interface situation. That was enough to sell the company on starting out with xAPI. And then you want to grow this capacity within your learning team. Are there other people in the business who can help you out? Absolutely. Do you want to learn from them? Do you want to interact with them? Do you want to maintain good relationships with them? Absolutely. But as much as possible, you want to grow this capacity within learning so that it is driven by learning and it happens when it's needed for learning. Okay, so we've got about 5-8 minutes for questions. Feel free to pop any more questions into chat or the questions. But Izzy, is there a specific question, anything that's been waiting that you want to feed me? Oh, no questions. Okay. All right, let's get some new questions then. What didn't I tell you? What are you hoping to hear today? Yeah, do they really download the resources? That can be really interesting. One client that we're working with right now is really looking at that curation and what are people using? What are they not using? If we're providing them with 50 things, maybe we should look at what's really useful and provide them with the 10 that are, so they've got better they've got better guidance, that they're coming to you not just for 50 possible resources, they want a few best resources. One mistake I made, without getting too technical. Sorry, one might say, narrowing down to one. What is one mistake I've made? I'm gonna I'm gonna go back to my time in the xAPI cohort. So my first visit to the xAPI cohort, I was a team member, and on a virtual reality team. And so we did a Unity virtual reality proof of concept back in the fall of 2017. And my mistake there, I think, is not involving more people. It was the world before COVID, before remote, and my own skills at like remotely collaborating weren't all there yet. But I wish I could have gotten more people onto the team. And so, as a generalizable, mistake to be careful of, look for who you ought to involve. When I say this capacity belongs in learning and development, don't shut somebody outside of the L&D team out and start a turf war that's going to make things harder for you in the future. Look for who you need to invite to the table, even if it's just in an advisory role, if it's getting a little information, you're even just smoothing over an ego and making them feel appreciated. What's a good resource to learn how to translate APIs into xAPI? I don't know one off the top of my head. I'd say really there are two pieces to that. One is how do you pull data from APIs? And often one of my go-tos, I'm looking at W3 schools first for some of their code examples. And so I would look someplace like that for how you pull information from the APIs. And then some of these resources I've already mentioned. There's a couple of LinkedIn courses. Megan mentioned learnxapi.com, but learn xAPI. And then it's really connecting the two. I've got this thing that pulls data. I need to send it as xAPI. So that's where the governance comes in. Who is the learner in this case? How can I identify this person uniquely? Is it an email? Is it an account number? How am I going to build that? Okay. What's my set of verbs? Is there a verb that directly translates this one thing they can do in the system? So my answer, what is a good resource to learn how to translate APIs into xAPI? First, you learn how to pull information from APIs. Second, you learn how to send xAPI. And third, you have to build up that translation, and then you've got it. Okay. Should the L&D data be fully separate from other data, general attendance or other types of engagement data? If we're talking about course attendance, we're talking about course engagement, then I would say that is L&D data and it should be there. I would argue generally your best bet is to take the learning data directly from learning systems and get it all into the learning record store. Have all the learning data together so that you can ask it questions. Then, if the organization wants it to live with other data, you can also get it out of the learning record store and into the data lake, and that's fine. Companies have lots of interests in the data for lots of different reasons, which aren't just L&D. But aggregating it in a learning record store, making sure you're getting as much of it as you can. It's not getting, cut off. It's not getting, chopped down in the data lake and then fed into the learning record store. The better way, learning platform goes in the learning record store. Learning record store feeds the data lake. So that's my question. If you want it to live with other data, that's how I do it. Okay. I have not really used other BI tools, Austin, other than Excel. I've done some visualizations in Excel, but it's been watershed for me. Okay. Got a call out for people to join Team Healthcare EQ. Oh yeah, and great point, Izzy, on the should the L&D data be its own thing or integrated. You can turn those other things into xAPI as well if they are relevant to the questions you might ask of your learning data. Yeah, Stack Overflow is, I've always said the worst possible job for a software engineer is stackoverflow.com, because when the system you're responsible for is down, you're really screwed. Where do you turn from answers if you have to fix stackoverflow.com? So yeah, I am that got a typo there, but it's stackoverflow.com. Yep. Yeah. All right. It is 2:42. I think Mark's going to want to pop in here for some final points. Yeah, ChatGPT. I've had a few conversations with ChatGPT. Very interested in what is next. It wouldn't answer my xAPI questions. I must have triggered something. This is back in December. I must have triggered something that it thought I was being tracked, and it just gave me all this information about how it wasn't tracking me. But yeah, I think ChatGPT, I consider as augmented humans now. It's not that we go to ChatGPT for answers, but ChatGPT can have some very interesting conversations, which then influence what we do. Okay, Mark.
Okay, everybody, I'm back. Peter, thank you so much. The conversation and chat was robust. This is a good reminder that the lounge is available for any type of team gatherings. You want to use that space, and of course, Slack to keep the projects rolling. We'll be planning out the xAPI party at the end of the cohort, so you want to advance in your work in those spaces. We're always available in Slack, and Peter is also very active there too. If there's any other questions that follow, be sure to check in back with Peter, with us, Karen, myself. Thanks for attending. In just a few short minutes, seconds, I should say, I'm going to close out today's event. Thanks for coming.